until last night, the mask requirement. Because the last time they sent something out was July 26th, which is a month ago, right? So I got to thinking, oh, probably still a mask requirement, because I haven't seen anything else. So I checked. And okay, there's 74 people in here, won't put any of them. Wear them correctly, up over the nose. My wife's a nose. The good thing is, college mandated, so it's not up for debate. So, when I call your name or some semblance of your name, please say here and raise your hand. Okay? And this class is full, and I did count. There are, in fact, 74 workspaces. Hopefully, all of them work. Our IT people, I think they went around and refreshed everything and checked everything. So, unfortunately, there are going to be some waitlisted students who may not have a workstation if all 74 enrolled students show up. The census date for this class is September 12th, which means the last time I will take roll is September 7th, because the college requires me to drop anybody that doesn't show up. And then at the end of each class, each of the first 3 classes, anyone who is on the wait list and has been participating will get an ABC code up to the limit of what we have. Right now, as of an hour and a half ago, we had 5 available spots because 5 people had dropped since Monday, I guess, or since whenever they last allowed people to sign up. But people were still being added to the wait list. So there's at least 5 available slots for the first 5 people on the wait list. And looking at empty seats, probably more due to no-shows. Okay, so when I call your name, answer here, raise your hand. Okay? Okay, everybody, try and get in front of a monitor. Not that I need you to use them, but it's easier for me to count how many are here. Okay, anybody need a chair? No. Okay, everybody's in front of a monitor. There's an empty monitor in the back row, right? Okay. Okay. Make sure the numbers come out. Believe it or not, people show up and call other people's names. All right. Rules of the class to make things simple. No talking when I'm talking. When there's lab time, you can talk amongst yourselves quietly, right? But about work, about schoolwork. No cell phones, right? Put your cell phones on vibrate. We are a connected society. I understand you may need to stay connected, or we have a hall. Step out in the hall, do whatever you need to do for all of these things. No eating or drinking. That's an IBC rule. I didn't know about that until a couple of years ago. Apparently we have a rodent problem here. Anyway, for all of these things, you need to talk, you need to use your cell phone, you need to drink, feel free to step out in the hall. Quietly. Okay? Right now we have a mask mandate, so masks must be worn properly, which means over the nose and all that stuff. Okay? We're college students, we're smart people. You know what that means. Okay, at the beginning of each class, I'll put class info up here that's relevant. I won't put a lot of it because most of it is in the syllabus. If you open up Canvas and go to the syllabus link, first of all, at the very top, there's a link to the textual syllabus that talks about all sorts of things, like cheating, not cheating, turning in assignments, this and that and the other, right? How things work, how grading works. 20 for the first day it's late, 20% off. After a week goes by and it's still late, it's 40% off. After that, you can't turn it in. Okay. In other words, if it's more than 2 weeks late, I've decided you're not interested enough in the class to to be able to turn it in.
Sir? You contradicted what the syllabus says.
I didn't.
I mean,
It may be said in different words.
maybe, but can I quote it? It says late assignments will receive a 20% penalty for each week that it's late. So is the first day that it's late a 20%, or is it the first week
So let
that's
me give you an
20%?
example, just to be clear. So suppose it's due on 08/25, which, by the way, you have something due on 08/25, right? And all dues are at 11:59 p.m. Okay? Officially the end of the day. On 08/26, you lose 20%. Okay? That's what it means.
Okay.
It's probably not a good way to phrase that, which is why I always have to go through the example.
Okay.
Maybe that's 02. That's what it really means. Okay. Now you ask yourself, why do you have homework due on tomorrow night? And there's some due Friday night. And then there's some more due on Sunday, I believe. After this first week, everything will be due on Sunday, at 11:59, as in the syllabus. The reason you have these Thursday and Friday dues is so that you can decide if you should be in this class or not, right? So I will do that. And it's a participatory class, by the way. I will ask people questions. Okay. Starting at this end of the first row. What is that?
An owl?
All right, I'm getting better. It is in fact an owl. That is the absolute best piece of art I can do. After years of practice. It wasn't this good when I started, right? This is after years of practice. Should I take an art class? No! The answer is no. It's an easy answer, okay? I remember in second grade, my mother was there for open house. My teacher was there. They were looking at a piece of art up on the board, right? And the second grade teacher, my mother, was saying, "Oh, how nice that is. Look at how good that is." And in my second grade brain, even then I was thinking to myself, what are they looking at? I knew in second grade, and it wasn't even this good, right? I knew then. It's important to know what you can do and what you can't do, what you have aptitudes for, what you don't have aptitudes for. When children are 6, 7, and 8, it is good for parents to tell children you can do anything you want to do, because that encourages them to explore their horizons, to challenge themselves, to see what they're interested in. That's a good thing when you're 6 or 7 or 8. By the time you're in here, you either can or you can't when it comes to computers. There's a lot of in-betweens, to tell you the truth, right? There's programming, there's QA, there's business analysis, there is project management. There's a lot of careers in computers and IT, right? But this is a programming class, right? And those people of that list that can program, almost all programmers can do those other things. No, that's not true. I've met plenty of programmers who cannot do an adequate job of business analysis. I don't know if it's because they don't want to or they don't have the facility. I think it's because they don't have the facility. They can't get outside their bubble. Think about the business, whatever the business is, be it healthcare, finance, whatever it is. But that's why I do this, right? I should never take an art class. Unless I'm just taking it for fun, right? I actually do have a slight interest in taking one of those things where the thing is spinning around and it's clay and you mold it and stuff. Ceramics. Okay, ceramics. I'm sure it'd be like this when all was done, but I might find it interesting, right? So that's just for your information. So that's why you have some assignments that are almost trivial. for Thursday and Friday, and maybe for Sunday.
Sorry, how do waitlisted students access these times, or will they?
I will email them to the wait list. That's a very good question. To his question, do I make mistakes? You bet I make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, right? I make mistakes in grading. I make mistakes even in things that I'll tell you. Why do I make mistakes? Right now I actively program in, we'll call it 4 languages. C#, C++ for the data structures class I teach, and C for this class, and JavaScript. If you want to call that programming. It is programming. JavaScript is programming. It's like Python. Python is a very useful language for some things. For data analysis, Python's a wonderful language. It's a scripting language. JavaScript has its uses, but frankly, I think it's done more harm than good to the industry. But that's neither here nor there. That's why TypeScript came about. You guys know about TypeScript. TypeScript is how to say it? It is a strongly typed language that transpiles into JavaScript. Transpiles means it's translated into JavaScript, because compiled means you generate code. All right. Thank you. I will email them at the first lab. So the structure of the class is essentially like that. We have 2 breaks of 10 minutes. They're usually put in association with the lab time. The lab times will nominally be 25 minutes, but it'll vary based upon lecture and where we get to and things like that, okay? But if everybody wants 4 breaks like we're supposed to have, we can do that. We just will stay till 10 o'clock. Otherwise, we'll get out about 9:30. We just have 2 breaks and then put the last 2 breaks at the end of class. That way everybody can get out of here sooner. So, if anybody wants additional breaks throughout the class, oh, and by the way, I never have a problem with you getting up and just stepping out if you need to, like I said over here. As long as you do it quietly. So that's the structure of the class. We do lecture, lab, lecture, lab, lecture. We don't do all this upfront foolishness every week. In fact, we only do it for the first 3 weeks, and then we just do this. With the coordinate information up here, your first exam is in how many weeks from now? Who can tell me how many weeks 9/14 is from now? 3. So you will have an exam about every 3 weeks. You have 5 exams, and then you have a final exam. Okay? And all of that is mostly laid out in the syllabus. I have to go through and update it. Apparently the last time I taught this class, it was on a Tuesday, so it adjusted dates to Tuesdays. So I have to go fix those. I'll fix most of them, I think. But there's still more to fix, maybe. And there will be other slight adjustments. So sometimes I don't get to all the subjects I need to. So sometimes the exam gets pushed out. Not usually. Usually I adjust the exam to move those subjects to the next exam. Okay, any questions about all of that? Sir?
What's the date of the final?
Sorry?
The date of the final?
Date of the final is the 14th, I think. Let me look to be sure. Date of the final is December 14th.
And
We have
on?
the first final, which is a rarity for me. I usually have the last final, the final on the last day of finals. So this is great. Means for this class, we'll be done soon. You may not be, because you may be taking other classes. But for this class, you'll be done on the first day of final exams, which is December 14th. Sir?
And on Canvas, I couldn't find the assignments that you're talking about that are due today and tomorrow. I looked into
Syllabus.
this, I'm sorry?
Go to Canvas, and then on the left side, there's a list of
Assignments. And they're organized by date, and I looked through the entire list anyway, and I couldn't find the ones that are due today and tomorrow.
So you see home, announcements,
What?
assignment, discussions, grades, people, pages, file, syllabus on the left side. Stop. Let me
Oh,
click
sorry, I
student
saw
view.
that.
Sometimes,
Okay.
no, student view shows them in the right order too. So, August 25th, which is tomorrow, should be a lab called My Name. Does anyone see that? Yeah. Okay, so see me at the lab period, and I'll show you, we'll look at it together. That's the other thing. I do not answer emails about assignments and labs, ever, 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 right? This is why you have a lab period. Okay, you need to look at the labs that are coming due, read them, understand what you have to do, and if you don't, then you come ask me during the lab period. So you may think I'm really tough about these things. I'm not. This is the real world. I'm not a teacher. Well, I am a teacher for this class. But in general, I work out in the real world, right? 40 hours, well, I wish it was 40 hours, 45, whatever hours a week it is. I work for a company called CoStar. You would know CoStar as apartments.com. Everybody seen an apartments.com ad? Jeff Goldblum, okay? Except he has some character name on the ads that I can't remember because I don't care. But that's who I really work for. Why do I teach this class? I certainly do not teach this class for the money. I get paid for this class maybe a third of what I get paid at work. I teach this class because everywhere I go, I've become the main interviewer. Okay? And to hire one person, we have to interview anywhere from 10 to 20. Right now, we've been trying to hire somebody for 6 months. Have not been able to do it. We've had people with master's degrees in computer science come in. We couldn't hire them because they couldn't do what we needed them to do, which is not rocket surgery. That's a combination of rocket science and brain surgery. Rocket surgery. It's not, well, apparently it is, right? Because what you have to do to be successful as a programmer, because that's what my group does, we're programmers, right? I actually teach the product people how to write something called user stories to express requirements, but that's another story. But you have to be able to understand the requirements, ask the right questions, just like you have to do for these assignments, right? And problem solve. Now, for this class, C, you don't have to problem solve that much because it's all pretty straightforward. Okay. But when we interview these people, that's what we do. We put them in front of a whiteboard and stick a pen in their hand, a marker in their hand, and give them a problem. And it's not a hard problem. Right? Amazon has interviewed me a few times because they keep asking me to come interview with them. And they ask silly things that I teach in my data structures class, like breadth first search and things like that. All the questions that I can answer, right? But there's no point in doing that because you're never going to use that. That's why I tell my data structures class. You're never going to program these data structures. You will use these data structures, and the reason they are taking the data structures class is so that they have the background to decide which data structure to use. So in other words, in the data structures class, they will program a stack, they will program a queue, they will program a graph, just so they understand how they work, what the performance profiles of them are, and what have you. But when you walk out of the classroom, right, when you're done with that class and you're out in the real world, you'll never write your own stack. You'll use something from a library. Which brings us to the next important thing. When it comes to programming, I want to see how I wrote it. You have the language, which is C, is the language. C++ is the language. C# is the language. Java is the language. JavaScript is a language. Python is a language. They're all languages, despite people's opinions of them. Okay? So that's the language. The language has certain syntax. Okay? That's where you start. Other than that, you're going to have a bunch of libraries that you use. And those libraries will essentially have canned routines. The other thing you have is an IDE. An IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment. Right? Now, how integrated and how much of an environment is different from different things. You can use Notepad, right? That's an IDE. You're typing code into Notepad. You can use Visual Studio, which is a very good IDE. There's a bunch of other very good IDEs, but they're just editors. They help you, but they are not programming. Right? They'll do things like IntelliSense. So in other words, when you use a class, you won't do that in this here in the C class, but when you use a class, you say object dot, and it'll give you the list of members that you can just go and select from. That's what IDE does for you. Very convenient, makes life very useful. The Visual Studio IDE is so advanced that if you pay attention to what it tells you, your code will compile the first time, because it will tell you every error before you push the build button. Okay? But it's separate from the language and from the libraries. One of the first libraries you're going to use is going to be, maybe I got the name right, who knows? See, that's the thing. Languages, I get different things. I got it wrong. It is stdio. STD is the abbreviation for standard. Okay, this is the last time I will let people show up late. Some instructors lock their doors at 6 p.m., right? I've never done that. I've come to understand why they do it. Right? Because you're either going to be here or you're not. Okay, let me run through the list one more time. Right. Oh, I forgot. Is there anyone's name I did not call? Anyone's name I did not call? So all the waitlist people who are here, right? You have to see me after class, and we'll get the APCs squared away. Go. Okay. Any questions about anything so far? I'm not trying to discourage you, right? I'm also trying to not falsely encourage you. There's a real world out there. And right now, well, there's two reasons we can't hire anybody. One, there's a dearth of candidates. So from one perspective, you picked the right field, right? Even if everybody was completely perfect, there's not enough people to fill the open slots in programming. Right? There just isn't, which is a good thing. You know, that's why we get paid so well, right? Because not everybody can do this. Not everybody can do what I do. Sometimes I can't do what I do. I was up till 8:45 solving the problem I got wrong at work last night. And I still didn't solve it. But I figured it out this morning. So I'm not sure how I slept last night, but that's how my mind works. My mind will keep churning and churning and churning. It's probably because my wife is wearing a boot like he is, and so I have to do all the housework and dogs and cats, and so I'm tired at the end of the day. Okay, so you will have the assignments that are due Thursday and Friday, and I'll try to get those graded as rapidly as I can. Oh, that's the other thing. There's 74 of you or so, and there's one of me. So the homework and the programs are not for you to get feedback and then correct. That's not the purpose of them. The purpose of them is to expose you and give you practice to do things. How do you learn how to program? There's only one way to learn how to program. To program. That's the only way to learn how to program. And you'll make lots of mistakes, right? I look back at some code I wrote sometimes and I think, what was I thinking? Oh, that's right, we had here's the lunch. Okay, I know what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking. I look back at ancient code that I wrote. I wrote one of the first 10 email programs in the world. I didn't know this until a few years ago. They published a list of the first 10 email programs written in the world and when they were written. And I said, oh, I wrote one before that. But the truth is, mine probably wasn't one of the first 10 because there's probably a lot of me's out there who wrote email programs for wherever they were to solve a problem. Because we don't, most programmers don't think like that. We don't think of the glory. We think of, I want to solve this problem so it no longer irritates me. So that's what I did at the university where I became a systems programmer when I was 20. I was solving a problem. People kept having a problem communicating. Okay, here's a little email program. Everybody can communicate with each other now. So it probably wasn't one of the first 10. It was probably one of the first 100. Didn't know that though, until a few years ago. Who knows? And it became the basis of, anybody know a company called Unisys? It used to be boroughs. That's how I got to California. I ran up and down the East Coast. Well, actually, I flew up and down the East Coast making customers happy. And then they said, we had this customer called PT&T, Pacific Telephone and Telegraph, that we want you to make happy. So they didn't tell me it was not possible to make that customer happy. I could only make them less unhappy. But we did. We made them less unhappy. So they brought me out here to the development plant to write programs. So along with that, I brought the tape of all my stuff. One of them of which was an email program. So some guy said, well, we don't have anything here. Can I use that? Knock yourself out. Because I had other things to do, right? So it became the basis of all emails in that company for, what was 84, 85, for 10 years until Microsoft Outlook came out. And then the company standardized on that. And that guy, at last report, Randy Gellens worked for, who makes chips for cell phones down in San Diego?
Qualcomm.
Qualcomm, that's who he worked for, thank you. He worked for Qualcomm at last report. I know all sorts of people that work for Microsoft, or I know people that work for Microsoft got fed up and now work for Amazon. People that work for Google, those are different. Those people are different, the guys that work for Google. I haven't decided if it's different good or different bad. It's just different. All right. That's another thing that will happen. I will tell you anecdotes, all sorts of anecdotes through my long and misspent life, right? I don't tell them to you to be interesting. I tell them to you because there's a lesson in every one of them. What was the lesson about first 10 email programs in the world? The lesson is just do it. If you want something done, just go do it. Now, is it true that a lot of everything has already been done? That's true. One of the ways that you can teach yourself to program is to take something that already exists and recreate it. In other words, you will know how it works. You will know how printf with format specifiers works, right? Because we're going to go over it tonight in a few minutes. You want to learn how to program, because printf, by the way, is in the standard I/O library. It's not part of the language, it's part of the library, right? And it takes inputs, and we'll show you how to do that, right? So if you want to learn how to program, just find one of those things that's not terribly complicated and go recreate it, or recreate some small piece of it.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question? Is C programming compared to C++ because of the syntax, or is it by the C structure?
That's a hard question, because it's a political question. It's not exactly a political question. Lots of people take C++ straight away without taking C. C++ obviously is built on C, right? But C++ has some differences. Just like, in theory, C# is built on C++ with a whole set of differences. In fact, C# and Java have become very formalized languages, which is a good thing for people like me, right? Because I don't think in terms of language syntax. I think in terms of the abstraction of what I'm trying to do, and then I apply the language I'm stuck with this tomorrow. I apply the language designated to achieve the result. Okay? You guys won't be doing that. You'll be thinking in the syntax of C for a while. I used to think in the syntax of a language called AUG, right, when I first started, but I quickly moved on from that. So is C a prerequisite? It certainly will not hurt you to take C before you take C++. Can you take C++ without taking C? It depends on who you are. It depends upon your facilities and your brain, how logically you think, and things like that. So. How many programming classes have I had? 1. I took Fortran once upon a time in college. Okay. All my degrees, most of my degrees are in physics. I have one in math too. Okay. Simply because for physics, the math was almost a freebie. I had to take 2 extra classes. Okay, fine, I'll get a bachelor's in math too. Almost free. No programming classes, because programming, was it a hobby? No. In our first physics class, they had a PDP-11, Digital Equipment Corporation computer, and other computers, right? And they said they wanted to introduce us to computers because they were smart enough to know that computers were the way of the future. The Large Hadron Collider, right? Driven by computers. What's going to happen on Monday that's very computer-centric?
Artemis 1?
Artemis 1, right? In theory. It'll either be Monday or Friday or the following Monday. We hope it goes. It's a NASA project, so let's see. But that's driven by computers, right? The docking. Nobody docks SpaceX's or Boeing, Starliner, or what have you. Nobody docks it. The computer docks it. Right? They got their hands over the controls in case something goes sideways and they got to do something real quick. But that brings up another good point. Testing. You can write programs, you can turn in programs. I don't want to be testing your programs, I want you to test your programs. The second orbital flight of Starliner didn't work. Why did the second orbital flight of Starliner not work? Okay, you have different pieces. You have a piece that controls the thrusters, a piece that controls orientation, a piece that controls different parts of the spaceship, right? Or anything that you're doing, really. You're what's the Tesla, right? Electric cars, right? They can pretty much drive themselves. My wife, Lexus, yells at me when I change lanes without using the turn signal. Starts vibrating the steering wheel. She likes that. Irritates me, but all those individual pieces on the Starliner were unit tested. They were tested by themselves. Okay? They were not integration tested. Integration testing is when you take all of the pieces and test them all together. Okay? Now some manager, I guarantee I know how this happened, some manager at Boeing was tight on his schedule. He was running out of time. He had to deliver. So he said, are all the unit tests good? Yes. Have we run all the unit tests all together? Yes. That is still not an integration test. So the second flight of the Boeing Starliner didn't get to the space station because that manager made a decision not to integration test. That's an anecdote, right? But it's essential. You have to integration test every day. Unit testing is essential too. Test your piece all by itself. And then you have some people that say, well, if I run all the unit tests, that's an integration test. No, it is not. Right? That's why QA is QA stands for quality assurance. That's a very important part of information technology. So if you can't program, that's okay, there's still lots of roles. If you can understand the requirements of how something is supposed to work, and then you have the ability to go test that, that's a very valuable thing. Because, like I said, I make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. So there's lots of roles in it besides programming. QA is a very important role. I don't know why we don't provide more classes for more specific roles. I guess you can't, no. I would do it differently, but they haven't asked me yet, so, yet, ever, probably. So. Starliner and Bowen, right? That's why their first test failed. The third one actually succeeded in docking because they probably fired that manager and had someone who understood integration testing to be essential. God knows how much money that cost them or us, the taxpayer. Don't know. Okay? All right, back to C. Any questions so far? Actually, what time is it? Okay, it is 6:55. So we'll take 10 minutes of break, 25 minutes of lab, in whatever order you want to do them. We will start again at 7:30. I will be here to answer, so go through the labs that are coming up. I will go through anything, any questions you have, just come up and ask for it. Okay.
35 p.m.
Okay,
35 p.m.
let's get started.
We have to do like whole patient work.
Couple of
about
things to
every
know.
Medication, disease they have.
First thing to know is take it out in the hall after I start talking. Okay. Okay. Let's talk about, people don't know where to start. This is one of the wrinkles about being a programmer. You have to figure it out. The net of being a programmer is problem solving, which means figure it out. How do you figure it out? Unfortunately, our school system, our school systems have been built on an ingest and regurgitate model. Take things in, spit it back out. I can speak somewhat authoritatively on this because I have 3 daughters, all of whom still speak to me, amazingly enough, all of whom have master's degrees, and all of whom are teachers. One's a high school teacher at Orange High School, as is her husband, actually. He's a special ed teacher there. That's the youngest daughter. The middle daughter is the humanities department head and teacher at her high school up in the Bay Area. And the oldest daughter is a 2nd grade teacher in Garden Grove Unified. Okay. So we speak frequently. In fact, the middle daughter called me just as I was leaving work to head here. So we scheduled a call for later. No reason, she was just checking in. So we talk about school systems and how things are done, right? Now the oldest daughter, has anyone heard of something called Common Core? Okay, they are moving to Common Core in some areas. The oldest daughter pioneered Common Core for math in the Garden Grove Unified School District. So she got to be the guinea pig to figure out what works, what doesn't, how to do it, this and that and the other. The fascinating thing is, right now she's a 2nd grade teacher. She was a 2nd grade teacher last year. And I forget before that, but she's also taught 1st grade and she's also taught 4th grade, right? So the pioneering work she did, she ended up with some of the same students, or students who had taken the Common Core in math, and she saw the results of the Common Core. The essential philosophy of Common Core is not to teach you how to do something, but teaching you why you do something. And if you understand the why, you can figure out the how. If you understand the how, you may or may not be able to figure out the why. That's what they finally figured out. That's why they finally figured out all sorts of other countries are eating our lunch in terms of technology. Because of how we teach people. We teach them ingest and regurgitate. Okay, so in my data structures class, right, I always ask a question for an answer, then they'll tell me the answer, and then I will always say, why. And they have to tell me why. They don't have to tell me why. I mean, that's part of the learning process, right? But it's to encourage them to understand the why something works, how it works. It's like 3 times 4, right? In my data structures class, I had people who couldn't tell me what 6 times 7 is. What's 6 times 7?
42.
42. I went through 5 people before I could find somebody who could tell me what 6 times 7 was in the data structures class 2 years ago. Maybe it was 3 years ago, right? It's frightening, truly frightening to some of us who are trying to get talent out there to get stuff done. Why matters. Why is very crucial. Now there's a lot of people, most of the programmers I work with are not good at telling me why. They know why, but they don't have my years of experience in expressing things, right? So, so I have to get it out of them in different ways. When JavaScript goes sideways and does something unusual, and I can figure it out. It's quicker to ask them, right? And they don't want to tell me what the problem is. They want to just solve it, right? But I always want to know why. I want to know why so that the next time I encounter it, I'll know why and what to do. Programming is like that. You have to not give up. You have to have a push forward, keep trying. Google is your friend, right? Google has its pluses and minuses, this and that and the other. Tracking, pull your mask over your nose, please, thank you. It tracks you, yes. It therefore knows how to give you the ad. So, you know, my wife has a surgical foot, so we had to give her a special thing to sit by her chair to help her get up. So now I get inundated with ads for all sorts of old people help stuff, equipment, right? That's what Google does. Google and Facebook and they all do it, right? But aside from all that, right, and sometimes it's useful. Oh, look at that, I can buy that. Sometimes it's useful. But it can give you a lot of good answers. Right? The trick with Google, or I forgot what Microsoft's is called, starts with a B. Bing. See, that is part of the B. And DuckGo or GoDuckDuck or DuckDuckGo, whatever it's called. There's lots of them out there, right? It's figuring out how to phrase the query. That's the trick, right? So if at first you don't succeed, try again, right? That's an old expression. It's an old expression for a reason. So, back to a lot of questions people have asked me. You see the assignment, it says, use printf to print your name, or something like that, right? Very first assignment. Okay, what do? Well, we're going to go over some of the syntax that you haven't seen yet. We're going to go over that momentarily, right? But after you know the syntax that we're going to talk about, there's a couple of things you have to do. The implicit homework. Everything I talk about here, go read it in your book and take notes. Okay. Why do we take notes? This is a good question. Why do we take notes?
So you can review them later.
So you can review them later. That's a good reason. Why else?
Aren't there studies that show that like if you write it down, it will help you remember it?
That's exactly right. Why? See, there's that question. Why?
I think you link motor skills to a certain part of your brain that allows you to bring things back and remember them.
That's part of it. There's a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is that when you write it down, now if you're just copying something from the board and you're doing it as a copy exercise, that's almost pointless. But if you take what I say or what I write and then figure out how to put it in your own words and write a sentence, you have processed that, right? And in writing that down, you have engaged your brain in an additional effective way. The other thing he said is there are multiple ways of learning. There's visual, there's oral, there's tactile. They all engage different parts of the brain. So that's another reason to take notes. Sometimes it goes in differently. That's why I'll try to say the same thing multiple times. It's harder in C than it is in data structures, but I try to say it multiple different ways. That's why you take notes. The youngest daughter, she's probably the smartest of the three. if they ever show up here, please don't tell them I said that. But she would copy her notes. She would take her notes in class, and then after class, she would go down and she would take those notes and write them down into a more succinct form. So she would engage that logical reasoning part of her brain twice when she took the first note, and then when she refined the note to be more meaningful for her purposes. And then, like he said, you have something to study. That's the real reason you take notes, is to form a concrete concept in your head as you write the note. That's the real reason you take notes. The different ways you take it in, you know, orally, visually, tactile, there's questions about how effective that is, but they know it is not ineffective. Here's an anecdote for you. Professor Joe, I forgot Joe's last name. I could find out because I have his classical mechanics physics book, right? So what Professor Joe would do, he would take his book, which was the book for the course, he would go up here and he would just copy his book onto the board, right? That's not real useful because you only have one form of input. It's whatever's in his book. The fact that he wrote it on the board and then read what he wrote was a limited use. Right? It turned out classical mechanics and physics, if you're of that bent, is easy, right? Turns out it's not easy for some people, as I discovered. So it was easy for me, right? So he said, okay, we're going to curve the scores so that everybody gets 25 points added, so that the lowest score comes up to a D, or at least passing, right? So I had a 95, so I'm thinking to myself, hey, I get 120. No, it's a curve, it's not a straight line. It's not this, it's this. So I never curve. I have a standard. You either meet the standard or you don't, or meet it to whatever degree you do. I never curve grades. You get what you get. It says that somewhere in the syllabus. 89.9 is a B. 89.999 is a B. So that's the anecdote about Professor Joe. The point of the anecdote is figure out how to take things in differently in multiple ways so that you can, in fact, learn the material. Okay, back to editors. So editors, that's what this is. So I've emailed the syllabus to all the waitlist students, and you got it right? Okay. So it'll have that link in it, right? That link is an editor that is functional. It'll take your input. It'll allow you to compile it and run the program, see if you got the right answer. It'll allow you to save the file. Allowing you to save the file is essential so that you can upload the file to Canvas, which is a requirement. You can now I prefer that all the programs be in one file. Now in strict programming, you have C files, you have files with a suffix of .c and files with a suffix of .h. The H stands for header, the C stands for just C, the C programming language. Right? You don't need to use headers. When you get into more complex things, headers become useful because there are ways of saying this program is this big program, but the header just has the signatures of the interfaces. We'll talk about all that later. Right? But for now, just try and do everything in a single .c file, and that's what you upload. You can use whatever editor you want, but I am not going to figure out your editors, right? Because this is a class about C programming. Notepad is a fine editor. If you have trouble, open Notepad, type in your code, and then stick it into the link in the syllabus. That will get the job done. That'll be my standard answer for any editor question. Stick it in the link that I put in the syllabus. Because you can use lots of editors. You can use whatever editor you want, I don't care. Just put it in. When you upload it to Canvas, it's got to be in a file type .c, and it's got to run successfully in this link. Because that's what I'll do. I'll copy the code, stick it in that link, and run it. Sometimes. Sometimes not. Sometimes I'll just grade it. Most of this code I just grade by looking at it. Because it really is pretty simple and trivial. Okay. So that's the editor question. So compile and upload to Canvas. This is a fine thing to use if you want to use other things. Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, whatever you want to use, I don't care. I only care what happens when I put it in here. Okay. I also care about not cheating, but these things are so trivial, it's a little difficult to tell if you're copying somebody else's code. It might be the same thing. A few coding standards. Some of these will come to make sense as we go. Okay? Always use braces. I'll give you an example of that in a minute. A lot of professors that you run into in colleges who don't work in the real world say, document everything. That's not true in the real world, right? In the real world, we don't want lots of comments to have to read. We want your code to be self-documenting. Code is most often self-documenting by picking meaningful names that are cased, right? So for instance, a meaningful name might be declared as int. Number of classes, right? Anybody who looks at that declaration is going to know what it means. That is a meaningful name, right? Always use meaningful names in everything you do. Now, the only thing you don't use meaningful names for is in loop control variables. Like say for I is equal to 1 semicolon I plus plus I less than 13, right? Because you're just going to use I as an index to an array or something like that. Except for that, make everything a meaningful name and use cases. In C and most of the other languages, cases matter. So for instance, those are two distinct variables. Because this has an uppercase N, this has a lowercase n. They are distinct. Case makes things unique. Okay? Case matters. And by the way, starting with a lowercase number. This is called camel case because the hump is in the middle. That's why it's called camel case. This is called Pascal case because back in the day there was a language called Pascal that this was a popular way of casing it. I prefer this one, right? But in fact, we use a mixture of this in the coding standard I have at work that we don't need to go into. So, but it's perfectly fine if you want to put some comment in the code. Comments start with // or they start with /* and end with //. Okay. So everybody's making a note of that. So when you go home, between now and next class, you will do your implicit homework and look that up, right? In your book, or Google, or wherever you want to look it up. It's up to you. That's the point. In the real world, you're not going to have me, right? You're going to have Google and your books and your references and coworkers and things like that. And your coworkers are busy doing their own work, right? But you can still collaborate with them. You have to be able to look things up and figure things out by yourself. And sometimes you just go ask somebody. I'm not proud. I go ask anybody that I think might have the answer. But before I do that, I will have spent a few minutes trying to find the answer myself. Because I have more respect for that person than to waste their time if I can easily find the answer. Right? These are life lessons, right? That applies to any industry, anything you're doing. Anything, right? Don't waste his time until you've made some effort. Big, small, whatever. Pick your time, right? Spend 5 minutes looking, spend an hour looking. Whatever the right thing is in your environment to do that. One of my bad tendencies is I might spend 2 hours looking if I could go ask, too many questions. But that's because I am obsessed with the why and knowing why and how everything works. Okay, questions about editors? That doesn't mean don't come ask me, just know that my default answer is probably going to be, go use this. And then we can move on to what we're actually trying to do, which is program. Okay. What's the homework? Oh, back to coding standards. Big meaningful names. If you want to put a comment, I never object to comments, right? Line size less than or equal to 60. That's a coding standard only because the grading mechanism in Canvas is poor. And if you like make it 70 or 80 lines, 80 characters, which is perfectly reasonable, it ends up wrapping around. It makes it hard to grade. So this is just for my ease of use. Fortunately, C does not care about lines, right? It doesn't care about white space. White space is blank characters, space bar, tabs, carriage returns where you start a new line. Those are white space, right? C, well, C++, all those languages. None of them care about white space, except in the one exception of quoted things. We'll talk about that later. So line size less than or equal to 60. Braces will come to in just a second. Linking the syllabus to the compiler, right? If you don't have something that's good to use, right, use this. Now, if you want to use something else like Visual Studio Code, some of the others, I encourage you to, because you're learning. Everything you're doing, you're learning. I always like learning. Learning is a good thing. Learning is a happy thing. If you learn how to learn, you are automatically ahead of the game. Let's talk about braces real quick. So, I'm going to show you the syntax for an if statement real quick. All reserved words in C are lowercase, by the way. Just so you know, that will make life easier. So if you type in that, and the compiler, gives you an error, you'll know why. It has to be lowercase. Okay, this is the thing about C. Chicken and the egg problem. By its very nature, I start covering a lot of concepts. The equal sign is the assignment operator. It means the left side is assigned whatever is on the right side. So the left side is a variable x. It's assigned 3. If you said int 3 is equal to x, you get a compiler error. Okay, so the equal sign though, then how do you test for equality? You use the double equal sign. That's just the syntax. Okay? So what would happen? By the way, the argument of the if has to be in parentheses. Okay, second from that end. What do you think this will do?
So it sets x to 4, but it's checking if.
So is it checking if x is equal to 4?
No.
What is it doing?
It's running and then it's setting x to 4.
It is assigning the value 4 to the variable x. Now it turns out, because this is non-zero, the result of this being x being non-zero because it was assigned 4, it'll be true, because that's how Booleans are done. But this is a very important thing to note. Be sure and use the double equal sign. Okay? That is why some people will actually write this it'll still compile because it's an equality operator. It says, is this and that the same value? Okay? But because you put the hard-coded thing here, if you removed one of the equals, you'd get a compiler error. I don't happen to do that, by the way. But there's a whole bunch of people that do. Okay? So anyway, so back to the if statement and the braces. I'm really trying to get to the braces question. Okay? Suppose we declare another variable here, y. And then we say y is equal to 13. Else, y is equal to 15. Semicolons are statement terminators. Remember, this will all become more clear when you do your implicit homework between now and next week. I know a lot of you are hearing me and will not do this, but that's okay. It'll show up on the test and you'll get it wrong. So, that's a perfectly valid statement. Your declaration of two variables, the if statement, and if 4 is equal to x, which we know it's not, it would execute y is equal to 13. But since 4 is not equal to x, it will actually execute y is equal to 15. It will assign 15 to y. Now, here's why you use braces. Now, the proper way to do this, some people like to start braces at the end of the line and then put the closing brace here. I'm not one of those people. I prefer them to both be at the same line, but it doesn't matter for brevity. You'll frequently see me do that up here on the whiteboard. That's the way to do it using braces. Now here's why. Let's suppose you did not do that. So whiz-bang speedy programmer comes along and says, oh, in addition to y being equal to 15, I also need to set x equal to 0 in the else case. So he throws that line in there. Next, right here. By the way, I go around the room asking questions. So know where your place is in the line. I used to pass something around, like an eraser or something, but in the days of COVID, we can't do that anymore, or it would be unwise to do so. So you're next. So, what's going to happen here?
This is like at the x equals 0?
Yeah. He wants, if the else is executed, he wants x is equal to 0 to also be done.
Exactly.
Hmm?
Exactly what?
Okay, what'll it do? Or why? My favorite question.
It's not in the if at the top.
That's right. X is equal to 0 will happen no matter if the if is true or the else happens. Right? That's why you use braces. Because if you use braces, he would know to put this inside the else braces. He would know to do this. Who thinks I've been a hero and spotted that problem innumerable times, and everybody thinks I'm a genius? I've spotted it innumerable times. They do not think I'm a genius. They just felt silly because they didn't see it. Right? That's why always use braces. It says it somewhere. If you don't use braces, it'll be a 0 every time. But nobody's going to get out of this class not using braces. Simple as that. Because I've solved lots of problems by seeing that error committed. Okay? So that's why you always use braces. I have people writing code I work with who don't use braces, right? I am kinder with them than I am here, right? I'll say, don't you really want to use braces there? Oh, okay, I guess I should. Okay. Those are all the coding standards. I'm not going to have any more. Yes?
Why is the first ending braces before y is equal to 13 and not after?
Why is the first which?
Of the, so like the second of the first set of braces, you know, like the end one,
This one?
the one below that.
This one.
Yeah,
This closes, this opens a brace. This is a closing brace.
yeah.
Every opening brace has to have a closing brace.
Okay, but on the other one, it's like after the x is equal to
Yes.
0?
That's
So-
the opening brace and that's the closing brace.
Yeah. So
Okay.
why is the second one after x is equal to 0? And the
Oh,
first one
because-
before y is,
Because we wanted x is equal to 0 to only be done in the else case.
okay.
Without the braces, it's done for the if or the else. And that's the error that people commonly make when they don't use braces.
Okay.
So, how do you formulate that question to Google? Why use braces, right? And this may get you a dental answer about why you stick them in your mouth. So then you can learn, right? Put that in and see what comes back out of Google, right? And then you can add to your question by saying NC, and it will narrow it down and eliminate the the dental answers, right? But put that in, and it'll give you some discussions like this.
Or parentheses and brackets, the same thing. I mean,
They're not, they are logically, okay. They're not the same thing, but they are logical enclosures. So you have an opening paren, you have a closing paren. You'll have an opening bracket and a closing bracket. So they'll always come in pairs. So like this will be for array usage. This will be for closing, for if statements and for delineating sub-operations so that they're clear. That we'll talk about a little bit. About, I'm never gonna teach you operator precedence because I never want you to use it. If you wanna go read about operator precedence, operators are multiplication, addition, subtraction, division, right? There are operator precedences, and you probably already learned about them. I never want you to use them. I always want you to put everything in parens. I won't grade you down for it, this is just my advice. Always use parens so it's clear what you're doing.
I'm not sure, but I think for the question earlier, it was more about why is, for the if statement, why is y equals 13 not within those brackets? When for the else statement, y equals 15 is within the brackets.
Why I'm putting x is equal to 0 in the bracket, in the braces?
Yeah, the previous.
The reason is because you wanted x equal to 0 to only happen in the else case. If you don't have the braces there, it'll happen in all cases.
So y is set to 13 regardless of statement.
I just made up a number, it doesn't
You
matter.
just put it there, like just in the middle there. Okay.
Yeah, I just made up a number. That doesn't matter. The point is, when you want x is equal to 0 assignment to occur, and the premise is you only want it to occur in the else case. You do not want it to occur in the if case. But if you leave off the braces, it'll happen in both cases.
I think they're thinking the first closed phrase is on the same line as y 13.
That's what it's
But it's just because when he wrote it.
That's a fair question. That's a fair statement. Sometimes I am unclear.
So that's on the second.
The way that I would actually write this code, I always put it on things on separate lines. And I'm serious about, go put why use braces into Google, see what happens. And then add the NC, see what it changes. I would write that code what did I say? Index is equal to 3. Semicolon is a statement terminator. This is how I would write it. Because I always like my braces to line up. It's much more clear.
What about the brackets next to the, for x?
These brackets? Oh, he's answering his question.
No, on the right side, next to the, what is it?
What bracket?
That bracket on the right.
This?
Yeah, hold on, yeah.
This?
So, yeah, that.
That's a brace. So now it's called a curly brace. So why is this here? Because C doesn't care about white space. It doesn't care if you put it at the end of this line or on its own separate line like this. It's the same to the compiler. He doesn't care. This is how some people write code because it makes your code a little more compressed.
Even if it's on a different line?
Yeah, it doesn't care. Line feeds, in other words, changing lines is white space. C, C++, so forth, does not care about white space.
So what's the use of the bracket, the brace, it's not doing anything?
Yes, it's
It's okay.
isolating y is equal to 13. So if I needed to come along and say, okay, I also need to say x is equal to 3 here. By the way, I could put them on the same line. Never do that, but you could, because white space doesn't matter. But your braces are already there. If your braces were not there, and you added that, you get a compiler.
Wouldn't that just be an add-on to y equal 13?
Nope. That's why you use braces. That's exactly the point. This is why you use braces.
So every time we want to exclude a formula, we have to take out, like we have to write another braces and then open it and then put the formula and then close it again.
No. You write the braces every time, no matter what.
Yeah, that's.
Then the problem doesn't arise. That's why you use braces.
Okay. Still trying to get.
Still trying to get why?
Yeah.
It prevents errors. It prevents accidental errors of the next guy 6 months later deciding he needs x is equal to 0. The previous guy didn't put braces there. He makes a mistake and just throws it down there, and the wrong thing happens. That's why. And I can empirically tell you it happens way too often. Empirically means by experience.
So, sorry, so hypothetically saying that if we need to put the x equal 3 in this whole code, wherever it is, we need to open a new brace and then put it there and then close it again and then put else again, right? Or no?
If you need to add x is equal to 3, and you had already put the braces there, you just put x is equal to 3, problem solved.
But then you say that would be an error?
No. If you didn't put the braces, if the braces were missing,
Okay.
then the compiler would get a compiler. It'd actually get a compiler error on the else.
So we could put whatever in the middle, whatever it is. And we could add more and more. It doesn't,
Yes,
It
if you
just
have
has
the
to-
braces, you can put whatever you want in there, in
Okay.
between the braces. And they'll be done as a group, as a unit.
okay. Thank you.
I've had lots of conversations with people telling me why they don't want to use braces, right? So I'll spend 5 minutes, and then I'll just bring the manager in and say, tell him that. And conversation's rapidly over, very rapid. Because the manager will say, okay, I've heard you guys talking about this for 5 minutes. The reason you use braces is it'll let you keep your job. That's what the manager will say. I've heard them say that, right? Whenever I've been the manager, I don't put it quite that way. I start to give them other whiteboard problems. And then they'll say, why are you giving me these problems? And I'll say, well, because of the brace thing, it made me wonder if you're the right guy for this job. And then I'll continue going through exercises with them. Which will do two things, right? It sends the message unequivocally, right? And it does give me the ability to evaluate them, and it gives them the ability to make a decision about where they want to go with their career. That's why I do it that way. It takes more time, but it typically has better results. But managers tend to be busy, so some of them will break it down real quick, because you'll lose your job if you don't. But that's the wrong answer. You always need to tell them why. See, that's the why thing, right? Don't just tell them how, tell them why. That's the thing about braces. I'm trying to tell you why.
So I'm curious, how do they code out using braces?
How do they code without using braces?
Yeah.
They'll just say, I'm doing a simple thing, or no, I'm only going to do one assignment. They'll just not put the braces on there. It'll compile. If I had my way, right, the C compilers would not compile. That would be a thing. But the language is the language, right? The language evolved from back in the late 60s, I think, maybe early 60s. I have to go back and look. But, so, I mean, yeah, programming was new. They were trying to figure out how to do things, right? That's why C# and Java and a number of other languages have much more rigorous and clear specifications, because we've learned how to write programming languages in the intervening time.
For program 0, it asks you to make a .exe file, but I was wondering how to do that if you have like a Mac.
This is one of those things where I still have to go update some of these things. You never need to turn in a .exe. You only need to turn in the .c file.
Excellent, thank you.
This is back when we had to turn in the .exe file, we'd run the .exe, right? And we've inherited this from previous people. I keep editing it as I go. I haven't got everything edited out. Because it's much more simpler to use this online compiler, which effectively calls a real compiler, right? It just does it from a website and gets the job done. In fact, I use this at work. This guy also does C#, C++, and this and that and the other. So if I need to test something out real quick, I'll just open up that link and throw some code in there to make sure, you know, my brain didn't take a break and I'm thinking something wrong. Because, like I said, I make mistakes. It happens to all of us. Okay. Braces. What time is it? All right. Any other questions at the moment? Okay. Let's get to the real stuff that I wanted to talk about. But this is important because you have to start writing code. And for some of you, this is your first time writing code. So that's why I tell you about the braces and self-documenting and all that stuff. Good habits are good habits are everywhere you go. The point is, the assumption whenever you write code, and this is simple code, so it probably doesn't matter, but assume that you're going to step in front of a bus on the way home, and somebody else is going to have to start working on your code. That's the assumption you should always make when you write code, so that what you've written is clear and maintainable. Right? Assume you're going to step in front of the bus. Or assume you're going to win the lottery. Let's do it that way. Assume you're going to win the lottery and you're out of it. Right? For whatever reason, assume somebody else is going to have to come do this. Now the thing you're going to discover is that, and it happened to me today, right? You have to go look at your own code months later. My boss Rizwan said, Andy, remember we added that virtual 3D tour for Helix? Well, where did we put all that stuff? Just 3 months ago. I don't know. But I could go find it easily, right? Because I wrote good, clean code. So sometimes it's you that you're writing good, clean code for. So I gave it to Rizwan. He was happy. I'm happy. Everybody's happy. Well, it's going to result in some. I don't know why he was asking. because I had to come teach. Well, I'll find out tomorrow why he was asking. That's one of the things you can do in apartments.com, a virtual 3D tour where it's like a video game. You can walk around the apartment and check it out. Pretty cool stuff, right? And there's different vendors that supply that. I mean, we don't do that. You as the apartment owner hire a firm to make these 3D virtual tours. And we just provide the facility to access them for your apartment that you're trying to rent on apartments.com. That's the great thing about what we do. Endless opportunities. People say, where are programmers going to be focusing? The answer is everywhere, right? Some of the most interesting stuff is going to be robotics. Right? Robotics is a lot of different things. That Roomba that vacuums your floor, that's a robot. Alexa, is Alexa a robot? No. What is Alexa? Alexa, Siri,
AI.
Cortana. No, it's not AI. There's no such thing as AI. We'll talk about that later, right? It's a front end for a search engine. That's all Alexa, Cortana, besides being the Halo thing, right? It's Microsoft. And who's the other one? Siri for Apple, right? They're just doing speech to text and then sticking it in the search engine. That's all they're doing. Now the search engines, right, some people call those AIs. What is artificial intelligence? There's no such thing, right? They're all a bunch of rule-based things. You apply rules, the rules get modified by your experience. They have a file on you that says, he looks at sports cars. This other guy looks at SUVs, right? So you say to Alexa or Siri or whoever, what car should I get? They're going to bias the answer based upon your history of looking at sports cars, your history of looking at SUVs, or your history of looking at whatever. It's not artificial intelligence. It's just rules, rule engines. Now you could call it machine intelligence. I hate that word intelligence applied to anything because it's not. It's just rules that one of us programs. So hopefully, after you have written some C programs, and you start making money out in the world, and you think to yourself, I'd like to get a self-driving car. You're actually going to think twice about it after you see how the sausage is made. Because a programmer's writing that code. He can make mistakes just like you can, just like I can, right? They'll get better. They'll get better and better and better until it really is self-driving. Right? And I'm looking forward to that day, because sometimes I have to drive with my wife, and I'm terrified. Now if you ask my children, here's an anecdote for you. My daughter was driving wildly one day, and it was driving her husband crazy. So you know what her husband said to her? She said, Jackie, you're driving like your father. She immediately started driving better. True story. Right? Now, case can be made, that's machine intelligence. Except human, you know, he changed her behavior by giving her an additional piece of data from his perspective. And all my daughters think I drive that way. And my wife, all the women in my life think that. So it must be, so it's probably true. But I'm the only one who hasn't had a wreck. Maybe I'm just lucky. Okay. Okay. Let's get to some real programming. Any questions on any of this? Implicit homework, look up ifs, look up comments, look up braces. Use Google. Why use braces? Why use braces in C? Implicit homework, right? Throughout this class, I will not always tell you. You should know. You have to study everything I say up here. Go study other sources. Your book, whatever book you've chosen, Google, whatever source. And hopefully somebody will come back and tell me I got something wrong. Because I will. Because C, C++, and C# have slight differences in some areas. And I'll get them wrong. But the good thing about if I get it wrong, that compiler is gonna tell you, right? So, okay. Any questions about language, libraries, or editors? What the difference is? Language, if is part of the language, right? The braces are part of the language. The parens are part of the language. The variable declarations are part of the language. We're about to talk about something called printf. Printf is in fact a library, in fact a method in a library, and the library is the standard IO library, it's stdio. Well, hopefully you have all beautifully written that down and studied it and think on it. All right. Every C program has a main method, and it's named a main. That is how the execution engine, the operating system, be it Linux, be it Windows, be it iOS, which is Apple's, be it whatever, right? That's how it knows where to start. And this is true of all languages, be it C, C++, C#, what have you. I can't say that for sure about Python, I have to think about it. I don't think that's true for Python. Okay, so what is a method? So here's the first question. What is a method? Okay. A method is composed of a signature and a body. So a signature is composed of a return type, a method name, and a parameter list. Okay? So let's take an example. Okay. I could keep on drilling down, right? In other words, what is a return type? A return type is one of the types. Int, character, float, substructure name, right? A method name is obviously just a name that you choose. The only restrictions on names is they cannot be reserved words. All languages have reserved words. Okay? Reserved words are words that are reserved for use by the language. So, fourth person, who's next over here? So I cleverly erased it. Okay. Is X a reserved word? Is if a reserved word? It is. X is not a reserved word because it's just a variable declaration. But if is a reserved word. It is inherent to the language. Okay? Else. Else a reserved word? It is, because it's inherent to the language. If you tried to say integer else is equal to 5, the compiler would give you an error because else is a reserved word. Okay?
Would compiler always show, like, whether or not it's a reserved word, or will it sometimes?
In other words, what is the quality of the error message is what you're really asking.
Yeah, like, will always be safe, like,
They're better than they used to be, I'll say that. They're actually pretty good. The problem is you can't always tell. Right? So for instance, in the not using the braces example, you just have an else hanging out there, it wouldn't be able to tell you that you need to use braces. It doesn't have a sense to say that. Because all it sees is a dangling else. Dangling means you shouldn't be there. Right? That's all it sees, so that's all it's going to tell you. Is the else, it's going to say something like no matching if or something. Right? In that case, it'll be reasonably clear what it is. But not always. Not always. So sometimes you have to experiment to see what the error is, to isolate what the issue is. Okay, back to a method, which is a signature and a body. The signature is a return type, a method name, and a parameter list. So, you can pick any name you want to for a method in general. We're going to talk about the main method specifically in a minute. But in general, you can create any method. And a method is just a means of grouping code. That's all it is. So that you can call that method without having to repeat the code over and over. Okay. That's the primary use of a method. Sometimes you use methods and you only call it once, but it's just a nice grouping because you give it a name that's meaningful. You say, you give it a method that says float, calculate, interest return. And then you give it some parameters, right? So then you know what it's doing, and you don't have to look at the details of that code. When you call it, you say, okay, I gave it a meaningful name, calculate interest return. So I'm going to assume that the float that comes back is the interest return. Because that's what you called it. That's why you use meaningful names. That's why you use methods. Another reason you use methods is just to group something cleanly. Okay, so return type is going to be a type. So some of the types are an integer, otherwise known as int, a character, otherwise known as char. It is not char, because you don't say char to it. It's char. It's character. But that's okay. That's just a big debate topic. It's like a GIF, right? GIF. You call it GIF or GIF? Graphical information format. So you call it GIF. This is a hard G. Float, which is a decimal number, floating point number. Hopefully you've had math classes so you know what a floating point number is. An integer has no decimal point. It's a natural number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are integers. -1, -2, -3. Those are integers. 3.14 is a floating point number, right? That was what you would represent floating point. 3.14 is first part of 5. That's why March 14th is sometimes called Pi Day. You have to become a nerd a little bit to be a programmer, right? So, you know, when May the 4th comes around, you can say, May the 4th be with you. That's what nerds do. Back in my dating days, that was the nicest thing a girl could say to me. You don't seem like an engineer. That was a really nice thing to hear. Cool. Okay, so int, char, float, and there's some more we'll talk about later. Right? But you have to put a type. There is a special type. Special type called void. What do you think void does? What do you think void means? As a return type.
It means there's no return, you just have the word return.
Right. It means there's no return, there's no value returned. That's exactly what void means. Okay? That's not exactly a type, but it's valid to specify as return type, void. Okay? Method name, in this case we're talking about main. Call it whatever you want to, but to start a program it's got to be called main. I don't remember offhand in C if it has to be a capital M or a lowercase m, or if it doesn't matter. I'll look that up and tell you. Who wants to look it up? Who wants to look it up and tell us? Volunteer, volunteer, volunteer. Thank you. You get to look it up and tell us if lowercase or uppercase matters for main in C. You don't have to do it right now. Do it whenever. Do it last time. Okay. Parameter list. A parameter list is always enclosed by parentheses. Even when it's empty, you still have to put the parentheses there behind the method name. Okay? Because that's the form of a method of a signature. Return type, method name, parameter list. Even if the parameter list is empty, which it can be. It doesn't have to be empty. So for instance, I'm not going to go into the details of this. You could have a parameter like that. The type of the parameter is character pointer, and you gave it a name P. P is not a very meaningful name, but it can only really be used for one thing. But params. I would never use the word params. What would I use? I would use the word parameters. Because I can type well enough that I don't need to conserve those four keystrokes. I would say parameters. But params, people will generally understand what that means. But I never write code like that. I would say parameters. So it's unequivocal what it is. Okay, so that's the signature. Return type, method name, and a parameter list. This is in fact, either one of these and or void is a valid method signature for the main method.
I'm sorry, could you just clarify whether that's an asterisk or just there?
This
Yeah.
is an asterisk.
Okay.
Shift 8, I think. Let's see how that memory is working today. Look at that, Shift 8. Accidents happen. I normally wouldn't be able to do that. I don't know why I can do it today. It's an asterisk, which means it's a character pointer. We'll talk about pointers all later. Okay. As it happens, either one of these is valid, int or void, for the main method. Now then, signature, return type, method, name, and parameter. Strictly speaking, return type is not part of the signature. This will become meaningful much later, maybe. It may or may not if we get to it, right? Just so you know, strictly speaking, the return type is not part of the signature, but it is required. A signature has a special significant meaning when you come to overloads in other languages. Yes, over there.
What do you mean strictly speaking? Like, what do you,
Strictly speaking means the pure definition. That for the pure definition, that for our purposes really won't matter. Right?
then why is it there?
Because I always give you the correct information.
Okay.
For our purposes, it'll probably never come up. That's why I say strictly speaking, probably doesn't matter.
In what situations would it though?
It would matter in method overloads. So you get to go look up method overloads in your own time.
Okay.
That's when, well, actually, it would, that is why it is not part of the signature. It is because of methods overloads, is the more correct way to say that. I have my own personal opinion about if it should or should not be. But oddly enough, I was about to say that people at Microsoft don't call me and ask me my opinion. That's not entirely true. Some friends I know that work at Microsoft do occasionally call me and ask me my opinion. But in general, they don't. Don Baisley occasionally calls me and asks me what I think in the realm of C#. Okay, so that is the signature. That is only part of a method. The rest of the part of the method is the body. Okay? Now, let's see. Okay, similarly, what is after the if is the body of the if. What is after the else is the body of the else. So what have we learned about bodies? What should they always be enclosed in? Braces. Similarly, the body of a method should be enclosed in braces. But strictly speaking, it doesn't have to be. You could have a one-statement body of a method without braces, and it would compile. It would be foolish, it would get a 0 in my class, but it would compile and execute correctly. But always use braces. Another case where you should always use braces. Okay? And the body is simply one or more statements. Strictly speaking, it can be 0 or more statements. Okay. So let's just take an example. Return type, method name, parameter list, which I've simply chosen to be empty. And then a body, and then statements that you want to execute. I just put 1 in there. You could put 0 in here, and it would execute just, every compiler executes just fine. It wouldn't do anything, but the compiler doesn't care how many statements you have in there. Okay. So, I put 1 statement in there, which happens to be a library called printf. That may become relevant to you guys sometime in the next day or 2. And I just said printf, my name. That's all it does. Okay, where are we? Here. What is printf? Is printf a part of the C language?
Yes.
Why?
It's a command,
The library called
it's a method.
No reason you should have necessarily known that. Oh, by the way, when I ask you questions, I don't necessarily expect you to have the right answer, right? You ask questions to make people think. So, printf is in fact part of a library. It is part of the library called stdio. That's just the name. That's the name they've given to implementers of C compilers, right, and C language facilities have standardized on a library called stdio, standard IO, that has certain functions. One of the functions stdio has in it is printf. And it'll just print out the parameters, because printf is just a method. It's just a method in this library. Right? There's no magic. Right? We'll come back to magic in a moment. Printf is just a method, and it takes a parameter. In this case, it happens to take a character pointer parameter that gets represented as a string, which you'll see as a pseudotype, like that. And it'll print it out on the console. So when you guys run that first lab, I think it's called my name or name something, whatever, you'll see the name printed. And there's no magic. Because printf is a method in the library, and the library is stdio. If you did not put this include statement here, this would result in a compiler error. The compile error would be something like method printf unknown, method printf not found, or something like that. That's the compiler error you want to get. So, as you go through this course, when you get errors, that's an opportunity for learning. Okay? Every error you get, and you get a lot of them, right? Trial and error, well, you get errors, right? Every error you get is an opportunity to learn something. Why did you get the error, right? And if you understand why, don't just keep changing stuff until it goes away. Understand why you got the error. And then you'll begin learning this language. And once you've learned one language, the next language will be that much easier. And the next language will be that much easier. Because you will understand conceptually what is going on. And you will understand, okay, it uses different reserved words, but it's doing the same thing, no matter what the language is. And you'll be off and running, and you'll be becoming more valuable and command higher salaries, right? or you can go program for Greenpeace. That's perfectly good too, right? Whatever your goal is, it will help you achieve your goal. Your goal is money, your goal is making the world better, your goal is world peace, whatever your goal is. Right? Makes you more effective in achieving those things. Pound include, okay? This is the syntax in C to include something. So when you say pound include, and you give it a library name in angle brackets like this, or less than a greater than sign, whatever term you want to use for them, that tells the compiler you're including something special. You can also say pound include and just give it a file name. It just sticks that file there as it compiles, right? So there's no magic to pound include. Pound include says include whatever is after my pound include. This is a compiler directive. Strictly speaking, it is not part of the C language, because the C language consists of reserved words and their usage. Anything that starts with a pound, and there are other things besides include, but includes the biggest one you're going to use, that's a compiler directive. It tells the compiler to go do something. Whereas the program is your code. Clear? Make sense? I know we took a tortuous path to get there, right? But these things matter because you're going to be creating other signatures, other methods besides main. And you need to understand where the signature comes from. In particular, the parameter list, which we've only talked about briefly. We'll expand upon more. We'll expand upon that more later. So, what is the magic that makes all electronics work?
Electricity?
Well, that might be a good answer, but that's not correct. It is smoke. Why is it smoke? Does anybody know? Have you ever had a piece of electronics that got some water on it, and then some smoke escaped, and it quit working? So when the smoke escaped, it quit working. So smoke has to be the magic ingredient, right? Obviously that's a joke. But think about it from a 15th century person who has an iPhone or an Android, whatever your preference is, right? He drops it in the creek when he's bending over to get a fish, and his magic iPhone that he'd been playing solitaire on, for whatever reason. Solitaire is a very old game, actually, by the way. It quits working, and he saw the smoke escape. So that 15th century guy might very well conclude that smoke was the magic ingredient. What is the Great Enlightenment? There is no magic, right? I'll keep saying that to you. There is no magic. That goes along with understand how and why. It matters. Who knows how a fuel-injected engine works? Some of you do, right? I basically know, but can I go fix it? Can I open that hood and fix the fuel-injected engine? Not a chance, right? There's other people who know all about that stuff, and most of them don't know. They just know, replace this with this and it starts working, right? But there are people who actually know, right? And that's the point about magic. All of us deal with magic every day that is magic to us, right? But think of everything as not magic, just something you don't happen to know. And then make a decision if it's worth your time and neurons to know that. I'm a physicist, so my base inclination is to want to know how everything works. And I mean everything. That's why I became an expert on COVID and relative expert. I learned a lot of molecular biology. Because I'm a physicist, I can understand how all that works. Chemistry is simply applied physics. Tell that to a chemist, they'll get very upset with you. But that's what it is, right? So, that's why I know what these maths do and what they don't do, right? And that's one of the problems in our society. People are black or white, on or off. It's not true. Everything's a spectrum, right? Are masks worthless? No. Are masks panaceas that solve everything? No. Something in between. And it also depends on the mask. This is an N95 mask. It's better than most of the masks you guys have. Is it perfect? No. It is not perfect. I was in the Pfizer study. That's probably the only reason I haven't got COVID, is because I got a special shot of the special Omicron vaccine, which wasn't available to everybody. All the rest of my family got COVID, my wife and everybody else, but they've been vaccinated, so it was mild. I was the only one that didn't get COVID, probably because of that shot. Maybe because I have a very good immune system. That's no great on me, that's great on my father. He had a very good immune system too. But it's probably that Omicron study shot that I got. No magic. There is no magic. Decide if you want to know how something works, but always know there's no magic to it. All right. It has to be .h. Thank you for whoever brought that to my attention and hurt my feelings, and now I have to go to therapy and stuff. No, I'm just kidding. I'm fine. Actually, I like you pointing out mistakes. Keeps me humble, number one. Number two, he gets the correct information out. Okay. Okay. Any questions about anything so far? Before I do the last part of the lecture that's going to give you the last piece of information for the lab you have due between now and next class. Okay. So we talked about printf. And printf is a function, is a method, right? Method and function are interchangeable names, mostly. Okay? So I'll use method, I'll say function, they mean the same thing. But the more correct name is method. Okay. So, let's talk about what printf does. What you should do, as part of your implicit homework, is go look up the definition of printf in your books and Google and all that stuff, right? Which I'm sure you will all do. But in the meantime, I have to give you that information which allows you to finish the labs. So the definition of printf, first of all, I don't recall if printf returns a value or not. For our purposes, it doesn't matter, so I'm not going to gloss over that. But what printf really takes is a format string. So when people write information, when they use these angle brackets like this, that usually says something that's defined to be a format string. Okay? And we'll do an example in a minute. And then parameter 1, separated by commas, of course. Down to parameter n. Okay. This is how printf is actually defined. Now, how it takes a multiple number of parameters, we're not going to worry about right now. You may not ever worry about it in this class. But if there's time at the end, we'll get to it.
Yeah, I just checked. It does return a value. I just don't know what it is.
Okay.
In case it
So,
matters.
for our purposes, we're not going to worry about it. Okay, so how does this thing actually work? So, the format string is a string contained in quotes, right? So, here's an example just to show you that white space doesn't matter. Right? You can format it however makes sense to you. Okay? So let's suppose I want to say Yes, I'm 63. 7. Okay, so let's suppose I want to print out that variable, age, in here. So what I do is I put in a format specifier. So you'll have to look up what the format specifiers are. %D is for a signed integer. %C is for a character. And there are other format specifiers that I'll let you look up. But for the purpose of our, and I hope you do, but for the purpose of our labs, that are immediately due, %D and %D is going to, and %C is going to be enough. So then I give it another parameter, which is the variable I declared called age. Hang on. Let me draw lines around this just to make sure nobody's. This is not part of it. Okay? White space doesn't matter. As far as the compiler is concerned, this is all jammed together on one line. It doesn't matter. It just skips over it. Except for that which is in quotes. So, the format specifier is %D. Format specifiers start with % and have a character. And then they can have some other complications after it, but they all start with %. And this is unique to printf. Printf is the thing that reads this string and scans it and says %D. I need an integer. So he goes and looks at the first thing in the rest of the parameter list. It says there's an integer called age. I'll take the value of that and substitute it in the string. If there was a second parameter, so suppose that Andy is %D. This goes right along with the owl. That's a % sign. It's not a G and an O, it's a % sign. And has initial, that's also a % sign, followed by C. And then that would turn out, Andy is 63 and has initial A. Because the way printf works, and it is only printf, it's not part of the C language, printf is a library method. Printf reads this, finds the format specifiers, %D and %C, and then substitutes the value of the subsequent parameters. That's printf. As simple as it appears.
So to be clear, %D is like the thing that tells printf to put an integer?
%D is the format specifier that says signed integer.
So what if we have multiple integers? Would it be like %C or is there another way of putting multiple of them?
You'd have, for every format specifier, it looks for a parameter to satisfy it. So if you put %D, it's like I put two here, %D and %C. You got age and initial, right? I could have done another number and put %D instead if I wanted to. But remember, it's just substitution. Okay, it reads the format string, which is the first parameter, in quotes, and everywhere it finds %letter, which is a format specifier, it replaces that with the value in subsequent parameters, one for one. %D is the first format specifier, so it gets the first parameter after the string. %C is the second format specifier, so it gets the second parameter after the format specifier. It's that simple. Back there.
Could you do %D twice for both of them? Is that %D %C, or would it have to be different?
If I put %D here, what would happen?
Yes. Oh, I guess, is it because this is a character?
I think what would actually happen, I don't know, but I think what would actually happen is that it would take the numeric value of this character and print it as a number. I think, but I can't swear to that. But I bet that's what it would do. The other thing it might do is give you an error.
So percent D is for integers and percent C is for characters.
More importantly, look up format specifiers and see the list yourself. The answer to your question is yes, but that's not the point. The point is, look up the list of format specifiers, because you may need others in the future. And if you start at printf, right, you can search on down or find it in your book or whatever to find that answer. You see, that's the real interesting thing here. I cannot teach you the C language. What I can teach you is enough syntax to give you the tools to enable yourself to proceed with whatever you need. That's the dirty little secret about programming language classes that they don't tell you. I can't teach you C++. I can only teach you enough that you can then proceed with whatever you need to do in C++ on your own. I'll teach you a lot, parts of it, but it's wide. And C# and Java are even wider. I usually teach a C# class. I still teach a C# class if we get enough students, right? Maybe I can touch on a quarter of the C# syntax, maybe. But I can touch on enough so that those students can then go and run with it themselves and figure it out. Okay, that's it for tonight. Well, hang on, don't go anywhere. Any questions about printf or what have you? Okay, so that's the end of the lecture for tonight. Hold on a minute. What we'll do next is everybody on the wait list. If anybody suspects you were here and I didn't call your name, you need to come see me, because if I have you marked as not here, you get dropped probably tomorrow morning. I probably won't do it tonight. Right? There were a few names that didn't get satisfied, both on the wait list and in the main enroll class. Okay? Other than that, the first thing we'll do is we'll get all the wait list people signed up, and then I'll answer any questions anybody else has until 10 o'clock. Otherwise, have a nice evening, and I'll see you next week.